You know, and one of the things as we have been in this time of reflection that COVID-19 has brought us, it has invited us inward, and it has invited us into this place of really finding, discovering what our values are, our values individually and our values as a nation. And one of the things that has erupted from this, one of the, cancer is the word that comes to mind. I don't know if that's the right word, but one of those boils that has erupted is the racial injustice that is, woven into the fabric of our nation. A couple months ago, I spoke about feminine power and how that's that second piece of our trilogy of, mind, body, spirit, that thought, soil, plant idea, the seed, the soil, and the plant. That female energy is that fertile ground. And what occurs to me is that when we have this deep cultural idea about who people are based on the color of their skin, their sexual orientation, their economy, their economic income, all of these things are segregating and marginalizing a portion of our population. And so it makes the whole weaker. Now, we are always whole. That is what our philosophy teaches us, that there is no separation. And so when we are marginalizing a portion of our society, we are not being all that we can be. Now, as July is Untethered Spirituality, today's talk, suggested talk title, our theme for today is Free at Last. Next week is No One is Free Until Everyone is Free. And excuse me if I mix these up a little bit, but when I hear the words free at last, and several people that I asked, what do you think of when you hear the words free at last? My mind goes to Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. And so I pulled it up. And, we're all familiar with those closing lines of his speech. We're also very familiar with the I Have a Dream section of the speech. And that dream that is deeply rooted, these are Martin Luther King's words. It is a dream that is deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. I have a dream that one day little black boys and little black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and little white girls as sisters and brothers. That portion of his speech comes towards the end of his speech. And this morning I would like to read the opening several paragraphs, because it really speaks to what is happening in our nation today. This speech was delivered in 1963 in August at the March on Washington, and I was 3 years old. This has been the background of my entire growing up, civil rights. And so as I turn 60 later this month, 57 years this has been going on. And really, like I said, I was born into this culture. The civil rights movement had been going on prior to my birth in 1960, and the fact that it's still going on today really calls to a deep healing. In this time of COVID, the deep healing is what I have seen this whole time is about. It has really brought forth what is not working in our country. And so this morning I wanted to share this, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream, the opening paragraphs that maybe you're not so familiar with. I'm happy to join you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration of freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree is a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still badly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualization. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hoped that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as normal. And a few paragraphs later, he says, the whites, they, and he's referring to the white people, have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those of us who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is a victim of unspeakable horrors of police brutality. And it was yet another instance of police brutality that brought all of this to a head. And it's not whether George Floyd or any of the other men of color, women of color, who were killed by police were guilty of anything or completely innocent. And it's not a problem of the police either. It is a problem. It is a condition of our national culture. Last night I watched the movie Hamilton since I was home. Disney Channel is streaming Hamilton. I highly recommend you watch it. I knew absolutely nothing about the play other than it was a Broadway hit, smash, on running. And it was about Alexander Hamilton. That was exactly how much I knew. So I went into this going, wow, there's all these people of color. The only white person in the entire cast was King George, I believe, whoever was King of England when we were breaking free. All of the revolutionaries were played by people of color. Puerto Ricans, Black Americans, an Asian woman, she might be something else, I don't know, but every one of them. The lead actor and the writer, I can't remember his name, Miranda is his last name, his father was a Puerto Rican immigrant. And he came into the story of Hamilton through Alexander Hamilton's experience of immigration, that he was, I read a little history, a bastard child of a woman who was in a marriage that was abusive. She left him, went to the Caribbean somewhere, fell in love, had a child, had a couple children, one of them being Alexander Hamilton. And through his own hard work, he was sent to the New Americas to go to King College, and he became caught up in the revolution of America and all the freedoms that it promised to bring. And so the writer's entrance into this story was through the immigrant tale. And the idea of the show, casting people of color, was to tell a story, a founding story, by people who are the people of America today, and those people that, didn't participate, that were brought here against their will. He was anti-slavery, I believe he was, but I know that he was really fighting for justice. He wanted a dream. He wanted the dream, the American dream, that there is possibility for everyone, there is hope for everyone. These are the thoughts that I've been thinking as we have this Independence Day about how so much of our community is marginalized. And I've been feeling really helpless as a white person in America, who has privilege that I never asked for, but I can't deny that I don't have it. My sister she just moved out of Phoenix a few weeks ago as riots and marches were happening in Phoenix. The police response was to gear up in SWAT gear. That was Phoenix's response to the protesters. And they were gearing up on her front, basically in front of her house, in front of her street. And right behind her apartment is a giant empty parking lot. And she went out and screamed at them to go and move all your crap. Go gear up if that's what you need to do over there. You don't need to be parked in my front yard, essentially. And this was spurred by having gone out after hearing several explosions the night before and going around talking to her neighbor, and as she came back to her front door getting a face full of tear gas, where this was all happening blocks away. Now, she related this story to one of her black friends, and he said, you only got away with that because you're white. And she said, yeah, and I said it because I'm white, because I can get away with it. And so I think, for me, my biggest question has been, what is mine to do? And one of the practitioners who is a practitioner in a Dallas center, Tracy Brown, I love and adore this woman, is a black American woman. And she has a Facebook page called What Is Mine to Do? And so I jumped on there and got overwhelmed with all the suggestions, but it has given me a lot of food for thought. And for me, at this point in my spiritual growth on my path, it is really about what is mine to do, and where have I been silent in the participation of freedom for all Americans. And so one of the things, the Center for Spiritual Living, I'm just going to put this out here, is offering I wrote it down somewhere, it's on the back of one of these yellow papers. They're offering a book study, which I couldn't wait. They're doing ministers in July, practitioners in August, and I believe members of Centers for Spiritual Living in September. And it's for whites only, because it has been pointed out that people of all colors, black, brown, all of the people that have been marginalized over the centuries are tired of helping us figure out what to do to help them. They're asking us to step up. And so there's a book by Layla F. Saad, and she is not an American. She's a black woman who was raised in England and is currently living in Qatar. And the title of the book is Me and White Supremacy, Combating Racism, Change the World, and Become a Better Ancestor. And just in the first several chapters, what this book is about is essentially a 28-day journal diving into what it means to be white in America and how that contributes to the disenfranchisement of other people. And for me, that has helped me. It has given me a sense of doing something. Standing here today talking, I didn't want to just talk for 20 minutes about, how messed up our country is, because I could go on. But really, I want to talk about solution at this point. And, solution for me is finding out, I am not somebody that is going to go and protest in the street. I haven't done so yet. That doesn't mean I won't. I have protested in other marches. And recently, the Pride Parade went right down my street on the 30th, and I went over to the park after, and I met a couple of our members there who walked in the Pride Parade. And, I want to support people because I do envision a world that works for everyone, as our CSL meme motto prayer is. And so, moving into that solution, one of my groups is reading the 4 agreements right now. And many of them are reading it for the first time. And I first read this book, probably my copy is dated 1997 on the first publication. So I read it originally, and I've read it a few times, and I've actually wanted to teach this book. I love it. But some of my people in this group are having a little bit of a hard time. They are overthinking it. And one of the things I really like about the book is that he wrote very simply. And in the theme of having a dream, his opening chapter is by Don Miguel Ruiz. If you're not familiar with the book, the opening chapter is about domestication and the dream, and essentially saying that we have all been domesticated, that we're socialized to be, we're taught what to believe and how to behave within our society and what to think about other people. And this domestication is what Ernest Holmes refers to as that race thought. And I don't know that I like the race thought idea as a sociologist. It is that collective consciousness that runs through each society that characterizes the society by what we value. And then there's the dream. And I'm going to quote from the book. Humans are dreaming all the time. Before we are born, the humans before us created a big outside dream that we call society's dream, or the dream of the planet. The dream of the planet is a collective dream of billions of smaller personal dreams, which together create a dream of a family, a dream of community, a dream of a city, a dream of a country, and finally a dream of the whole humanity. And so fitting in with CSL, that really speaks to that dream of a world that works for everyone. Now, if you're not aware, CSL comes up with these themes and topics last year. They had no idea COVID was coming. They had no idea that race relationships were going to be erupting. We had no idea that this call, what's happening in the political climate, they had no idea any of this was coming. But it was already in the mind of God, for we had been saying a prayer. And so June was Maverick Spirituality, and we talked about mindful speech, which is agreement number 1, be impeccable with your word. We talked about just breathe was the first week, and I like to think of that as don't take anything personally. When you hear something, Miguel Ruiz talks about, things are going on in people's lives, and whatever they think about me is none of my business. And so I get to just breathe. Don't make assumptions. I like to think about that as that mindful intentions that we talked about in June, that my assumptions are just guesses. They're just best guesses. And so really I have to be, what's my intention here? And always do your best. And that was last week with mindful actions, where Reverend Gregory talked about, our actions and where are we coming from with our actions. I did not get the memo that we were not having singers anymore because we spit on people when we sing. And I tell you, watching Hamilton last night, little aside, the man singing King George was, oh my God. I was just like COVID factory, dude. He was spitting everywhere. He was very spitty when he sang. So We just have staff here today. Everyone stayed home, so I guess we could have sang. But, it's those mindful actions that we wear masks, we participate in physical distancing, we do what we can to keep others safe, and that is a mindful action. So this last week in my reading group, we were reading chapter 6, which is the next chapter, and that's the Toltec Path to Freedom. And as we were reading, and many of the people were grumbling about what he was writing, I'm highlighting and underlining and saying, I've got to talk in here. So on page 93, he's asking, are we really free? Are we really free to be who we really are? And the answer is no, we're not free. Freedom has to do with the human spirit and is the freedom to be who we really are. Yep, done with that part. And then he talks about how kids don't worry about the past or the future, that they're always in this present moment of now, and that they're not afraid to love. They're not afraid of the future, and they're not ashamed of the past. They are present to the now. And I think in those words, he's really talking about, when we get that domestication and we're taught how to behave within our society and we're taught who the good people are and who the bad people are. As I said, I grew up with this background, not understanding what was going on in the world when I was 3 and 5. And I distinctly remember, as I believe it was probably around the Watts riots, really thinking, aren't there bad white people too? Why I couldn't understand why there was this focus on black people at that time. And they were pissed. They were pissed. They wanted their rights. They wanted to be who they were. They wanted to be who they are. And the society doesn't allow that to a certain degree. And today, yes, we have made improvements from 1963, but obviously we still have a ways to go. Miguel Ruiz talks about the judge and the victim that lives in each of our heads. It's part of our programming. And that judge and the victim take away our happiness, take away our freedom. And that judge, it's always monitoring us, that little voice in our head. And I know we just went through the Untethered Soul with Reverend Gregory, where we talk about that voice in our head that's commentating on every single moment of our lives. And that judge is like judging me. I'm judging myself all the time. Am I going to do a good enough talk? Do I look right? Everything that's going on with me. And then I'm looking out as, is Kyle enjoying my talk? I don't know. I'm judging it because, he's hanging out and listening. I don't know what's going on in his head, but I'm sitting here judging it. I can't relax into this moment of now in that childhood exuberance. And then there's the victim, the other half. When we're not judging you, we're blaming you or blaming me. I blame myself a lot for things when I fall short. And that, again, is that programming. I hear voices in my head, whether it's my mother or any of the other influences in my life, where I am a victim to them telling me how to be and how to do and how I never measured up. And I could not be happy because I'm always striving. I'm judging myself. I'm being victim to they did it to me. And so I have to let that go. And I do that by sinking into this moment of now. He talks about the parasite, those negative emotions that are mostly fear. And on page 104, Miguel Ruiz says, we can compare this parasite to a monster with 1,000 heads, and every head is an individual fear that we have. And so we can attack that head, that monster, one head at a time, one fear at a time. And so the freedom we're looking for is the freedom to be ourselves, he says, to express ourselves. And most of the time, we do things to please others. We just want to be accepted. And I know that's all I wanted. I am still often confused. I don't know how to navigate life a lot of the time. And another thing that I always remember, my mother's mother, my Omi, was from Germany. And my mom is first generation American on that side. My dad has been here for God ever. I call that side the American mutt side, and my mom's side is the German Swedish, immigrant side. And she'd ask me, "What's a Schluss?" whenever we saw her, and that's German for what's going on, what's new. And I always remember just whenever, and today when I'm asked that question, I just always remember staring at her blankly, not knowing how to respond. There's so much new since I last saw you, even as a little kid, and so I'm always tongue-tied because I don't know what the right answer is. I'm better with that now, as I let go of the expectations, what I think you want from me, and just settle into what I am. I get to have that breath. So some of the solutions that Miguel Ruiz talks about is the mastery of awareness. So when we become aware of something, we can change it. And that's what's happening in our country right now. We are becoming aware of the systemic racism, the racism that, oh, I'm not a racist. I love all people. And where our very systems are set up to disenfranchise groups of people, and a lot of it is income-based, and because it's income-based, it affects people of color more than it affects whites, and that is not to say that there are not poor white people that are affected. And so, it's that deep, the way our tax system is structured, the way so many things are structured. It is designed to separate, and we have seen the separation as the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and the middle class has disappeared in our country, virtually disappeared. It is within the very nature of our culture. And so that is something that we are becoming deeply, profoundly aware of. The abuses of police departments, the abuses of power in our nation. And where some of the things that are happening, where police are being called for drug and homelessness, where really that's a social worker's place, where they are trained to deal with that, and where we need to support our infrastructures, to support everyone. So we're becoming aware of the problem. And that's the first step to changing anything. And whether we're talking about our nation or whether we're talking about ourselves, we have to become aware of it. And that's where we move into the mastery of transformation. And that's the path of change. It's recognizing where we are and then having a vision of where we want to be. And noticing what are the changes required. And I think we're starting to move into that. And each of us having our own personal work to do, are working into that. Where is it that I want to be in this? We are having a revolution in this country, and it starts personally, which each and every one of us having a personal revolution. And finally, it's the mastery of intent, the way of transformation, the how. And I think that feeds back into what we were talking about, that mindful action, the mindfulness of all of those steps, mindful speech. What is my intention behind it? Am I here to, for you to like me? Is that my intention? Or my intention here is to speak my heart? And Miguel Ruiz says that ultimately the mastery of intention is the mastery of love. And that it's love that is the healing power. And it is that love that God is. When we list all those things that we talk about to try and picture, visualize, and embody God, Spirit, the oneness, the wholeness, the universe, it always comes down to love. Because I keep coming back to a house divided cannot stand. God cannot be divided from itself. There is no separation going on here. And it is that vibration of love that will ultimately bring us together. Every morning I wake up with KUZZ. That's my alarm clock. And every day at 7 o'clock they do the Pledge of Allegiance. And, every time I hear it every morning, sometimes little kids that can barely talk do it. They have other people doing it. We are one nation. That is our dream. One nation, I like to say, in God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. No exceptions. Thank you. So, I'm like, what did I write down that I didn't talk about? Next time. Anne says. All right, so let's go ahead and take that into prayer now that Merritt has rushed up to accompany me. Thank you, Merritt. Just taking that deep breath, going within, knowing that there is only one Spirit, one God, one love. And it's this oneness, this wholeness, this all creative beingness that by any name, whether we call it nature, God, Allah, Buddha, Jesus, Krishna, by any name, I know that it is that wholeness that is the very source of life itself. I know that it is always love. I know that it is always peace, and I know that it is power. I know that it is abundant, and I know that it is bigger than any of us could ever imagine or clarify or classify or name by any number of words. It is everywhere, everyone present, and I meet this in this moment of now. And so right here and now, I recognize that I am that. I am this wholeness, I am this love, I am this all-powerful presence. And as I know this is true about me, I know this is true about everyone here, watching online, here physically in person, and that this knowingness radiates out into the world. That this love radiates out into the world. And so I know that this world is in this time of transformation. I know that our nation is a time of transformation. And I know that each and every one of us is being called to personally meet ourselves. To be uncomfortable, for that is the nature of change. It is to let go of what is comfortable, what is familiar, and embrace the new. Embrace that larger picture of wholeness. For we are never separated, and it is our separation that makes us weak. And God is diverse. There is no one thing that God is. And so I know, taking the words of Michael Franti, I know that life is not the melting pot. America is not a melting pot where we all strive for homogeneous one sameness. No, we are the fruit salad, where each and every one of us, the strawberries and the grapes and the apples and the pineapples and the oranges and everything, every fruit brings its own unique characteristic and that unique flavor to the salad. That we don't strive for oneness. We strive for that diversity. We strive to bring in every divine aspect of God. We recognize that in diversity is wholeness and health. There is wellness and growth in diversity. There is change when we meet someone who is not the same. When we meet somebody recognizing there's a bigger picture of God than I ever thought possible. And I see that in you. I see that in that difference. Knowing that we are ultimately the same. For in the rest of that fruit salad analogy is the juice at the bottom. And that is the juice of our source. Where it is all one. Where we are all sourced from this one beginning. And so as we rest in this juicy, delicious idea of diversity, of wholeness, of love, I am grateful. I am grateful for this time, grateful for this teaching. I am grateful for each and every human being on this planet that makes this planet what it is. I'm grateful for our nation, even as we go through these struggles. They're growing pains. They are nothing but growing pains as we grow into a better expression of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everyone, no exceptions. And so I'm grateful for this time. I'm grateful for this time with you. And we rest in this, knowing that everything is unfolding perfectly, that what is ours to do is obvious, and we step into it with joy and gratitude. And so I release this word into the mind of law, into the mind of love that already knows yes and already has that plan. Already sees the future because the future is now. And so I release this word knowing it is complete. And together we anchor it by saying, and so it is. I just want to thank you all for being here, and just knowing that we move into this week with an open heart, knowing that everything is unfolding and that we are moving into a greater expression of ourselves. Each and every day, God is unfolding through us as us. And so have a blessed week. Thank you.